Guys, enjoy.
Thank you.
Channels 15 and 11, purposes of 2.5 men. Channels 26 and 12, the Dalvio and Castro. Channels 36 and 15, nightly business. Channels 42 and 10, Happy Morning. Text 30. Channel 3 and 5, Stephen Colbert. Channel 6 and 8, The Tonight Show, starring Jimmy Fallon. Channel 7 and 9, Jimmy Kimmel Live. Channel 7.2 and 123, Perry Mason. Channel 46 and 13, Keeping Up Appearances. Channels 42 and 10, services of Two Row Girls. At 11 o'clock. Channel 3.2 and 125, Drew Perry. Channel 6.3 and 126, services of Brian Miller. Channels 15 and 11, two episodes of Hot in Cleveland. Channels 26 and 12, Consider This. Channel 36 and 15, Listen. Channels 42.2 and 121, House of Games. At 11:30. Channel 3 and 5, Olympic Show with James Corden. Channel 3.2 and 1.5, Jungle to Jungle. Channel 6 and 8, Chris Martin. Channel 7 and 9, ABC News Nightline. Channel 7.2 and 123, The Twilight Zone. Channel 15.2 and 1.3, Eraser. Channel 26 and 12, Go to the World Show. Channel 42 and 10, Michael Ball. At midnight. Channel 6.3 and 126, Particular Destiny Heart. Channel 7 and 9, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Channel 7.2 and 123, The Raptor Files. Channel 15 and 11, 2 episodes of Seinfeld. Channel 26 and 12, 2 episodes of Accidental House. Channel 36 and 13, Charlie Rose. Channel 42 and 10, 2 episodes of Copy and 30. Channel 3 and 5, Entertainment Tonight. Channel 6 and 8, Chris and Daily. Channel 7 and 9, Just for Us. And that is a video on this news for Thursday, May 19th, 2016. All right. Well, that heads us right into your 6 o'clock hour, and that means it's your live reading for a lovely Thursday evening that we've been having. It's nice, a little cloudy, but it's still really nice out as far as the temperature goes. We have your reader, Phil Hessling and Jared Ross, in for you. So I'm going to head it on over to the gentleman in the studio, and we're going to get started on your live reading for you.
Good evening. This is from the front page of the New York Times. Defiant and determined to transform the Democratic Party, Senator Bernie Sanders is opening a 2-month phase of his presidential campaign aimed at inflicting a heavy blow on Hillary Clinton in California and amassing enough leverage to advance his agenda at the convention in July, or even wrest the nomination from her. Advisors to Mr. Sanders said on Wednesday that he was newly resolved to remain in the race, seeing an aggressive campaign as his only chance to pressure Democrats into making fundamental changes to how presidential primaries and debates are held in the future. They said he also held out hope of capitalizing on any late stumbles by Mrs. Clinton or any damage to her candidacy, whether by scandal or by the presumptive Republican nominee, Donald J. Trump. After sounding subdued, if not downbeat, about the race for weeks, Mr. Sanders resumed a combative posture against Mrs. Clinton, demanding on Wednesday that she debate him before the June 7 primary in California, and highlighting anew what he asserted were her weaknesses against Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, his advisors said, has been buoyed by a stream of polls showing him beating Mrs. Trump by larger margins than Mrs. Clinton in some battleground states, and his belief that an upset victory in California could have a psychological impact on convention delegates who already have doubts about Mrs. Clinton. But his newly resolute attitude is also the cumulative result of months of anger at the National Democratic Party over a debate scheduled that his campaign said favored Mrs. Clinton, a fundraising arrangement between the party and the Clinton campaign, the appointment of fierce Clinton partisans as leaders of important convention committees, and the party's rebuke of Mr. Sanders on Tuesday for not clearly condemning a melee at the Nevada Democratic Convention on Saturday. While Mr. Sanders said he does not want Mr. Trump to win in November, His advisors and allies say he is willing to do some harm to Mrs. Clinton in the shorter term if it means he can capture a majority of the 475 pledged delegates at stake in California and arrive at the Philadelphia convention with maximum political power. Tad Devine, a senior advisor to Mr. Sanders, said the campaign did not think its attacks would help Mr. Trump in the long run, but added that the senator's team was not thinking about the possibility that they could help derail Mrs. Clinton from becoming the first woman elected president. The only thing that matters is what happens between now and June 14, Mr. Devine said, referring to the final Democratic primary in the District of Columbia. We have to put the blinders on and focus on the best case to make in the upcoming states. If we do that, we can be in a strong position to make the best closing argument before the convention. If not, everyone will know in mid-June and we'll have to take a hard look at where things stand. The prospect of a drawn-out Democratic fight is deeply troubling to party leaders who are eager for Mrs. Clinton and House and Senate candidates to turn to attacking Mr. Trump without being diverted by Democratic strife. Mr. Sanders won nearly 10 million votes compared to Mrs. Clinton's 13 million, and Democratic leaders say she needs time to begin courting the young voters, liberals, and other Sanders supporters who view her as an ally of corporate and big money interests. But Mr. Sanders has sharpened his language of late, saying Tuesday night that the party faced a choice to remain dependent on big money campaign contributions and be a party with limited participation and limited energy, or welcome into the party people who are prepared to fight for real economic and social change. Mr. Sanders' street fighting instincts have been encouraged by his like-minded campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, who has been blistering against the Clinton camp and the party establishment. On Wednesday, he took to CNN to accuse Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, the Democratic National Chairwoman, of throwing shade on the Sanders campaign from the very beginning. For weeks, some current and former Sanders campaign workers have privately acknowledged feeling disheartened about Ms. Weaver's determination to go after the Democratic National Committee, fearing a pitched battle with the party they hope to support in a general election. The inter-party fighting has affected morale, they say, and raised concerns that Mr. Weaver, a longtime Sanders aide, who more recently ran a comic book store, was not devoted to achieving Democratic unity. Several described the campaign's message as having devolved into a near obsession with perceived conspiracies on the part of Clinton's allies. Democratic leaders say they wanted to do everything possible to avoid having Clinton-Sanders tensions in the Philadelphia convention into the sort of chaos they had expected to mar the Republican convention. So far, though, Mr. Sanders has not indicated that he would ask his delegates to support Mrs. Clinton, as she did in 2008 for Barack Obama. I'm hopeful that the two candidates will come together and soon, which could blunt the possibility of real trouble at our convention, said Edward G. Rendell, the former governor of Pennsylvania and a Clinton supporter, who is chairman of the Philadelphia Host Committee for the convention. But you look at what happened in Nevada, and you worry. The melee there, at which Sanders supporters revolted and threatened the state Democratic chairman in a fight over delegates, intensified concerns among Clinton allies. Senator Barbara Boxer of California, who attended the convention, said she spoke with Mr. Sanders late Tuesday and said he was distressed by the Nevada episode. He will be judged as to whether or not he has leadership qualities by the way he handles this, she said. Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, who is close to Mr. Sanders, spoke with Mr. Sanders on Friday about not letting the state convention devolve into a messy fight. They spoke again on Tuesday afternoon, and Mr. Reid complained that a staff member who attended feared for her safety. But Mr. Sanders' subsequent statement condemning the violence, which mostly devolved on how dismissively he felt the party was treating him, did little to soothe Mr. Reid's unease. Bernie and I have known each other for a long time, and I believe he is better than this, Mr. Reid said Wednesday. But some Sanders supporters said that the Democrats were ignoring an undercurrent of anger among those who fear that Mrs. Clinton, if elected, would lack the courage to challenge her friends and political contributors. We want to have progressive values and socialism on the convention's agenda rather than slip back into the centrist Democratic thinking if she gets elected, said Tick Sigerbloom, a state senator in Nevada and a Sanders supporter. I think there could be some chaos at the convention, at least outside, with a lot of anarchists, socialists, young people. Mrs. Clinton's campaign has largely taken Mr. Sanders' latest broadsides in stride. In soliciting donations Wednesday, it said that the two-front battle against Mr. Sanders and Mr. Trump was one of the toughest parts of our campaign so far. A Clinton campaign spokesman declined to comment about Mr. Sanders' debate proposal in California. Privately, Mrs. Clinton's advisors said Mr. Sanders could win California, but emphasized their confidence that Mrs. Clinton would still win the nomination. She now has a total of 2,293 pledged delegates and superdelegates. She needs 90 more to win the nomination, although superdelegates can shift their support up the convention. Mr. Sanders has 1,533 pledged delegates and superdelegates. Mr. Sanders is now running slightly behind Mrs. Clinton in California in public polls. Ben Tolchin, Mr. Sanders' pollster, pointed to signs of rising voter registration in California among young people and independents, two core Sanders constituencies, as evidence that he could win the state. But Hispanic registration is also rising, which could benefit Mrs. Clinton. With Mr. Sanders expected to campaign aggressively over the next 3 weeks, his supporters in the state said they were focused on winning the primary, not on November. If you want to talk about historic, let's talk about the record turnout numbers at his rally, said Mayor Bao Nugent of Garden Grove, California, a Sanders supporter. Senator Sanders isn't obliged to help Secretary Clinton if she wins. That's a decision his team can make if they face that choice. Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, Mr. Sanders' lone endorser in the Senate, said that the party's divisions would only deepen if Mr. Sanders was driven from the race now. You can say to them, hey, we don't want to hear your views, and shut the door on them, Mr. Merkley said, and then a month later, open the door and say, hey, can you come out and help us?
Trump lists 11 potential judges. Donald Trump on Wednesday released a list of 11 judges whom he would consider nominating to the U.S. Supreme Court if he is elected president, and the late Associate Justice Antonin Scalia's seat is still empty by then. The Associated Press reported that these names are on the list: Stephen Carlton of Iowa, Allison Ide of Colorado, Raymond Gruender of Missouri, Thomas Hardiman of Pennsylvania, Raymond Kethledge of Michigan, Joan Larson of Michigan, Thomas Lee of Utah, William Pryor of Alabama, David Strauss of Minnesota, Diane Sykes of Wisconsin, and Don Willett of Texas. 5 of the potential nominees, Ide, Lee, Strauss, Larson, and Willett, are on state Supreme Courts. The rest serve on U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals. Carlton and Gruender on the 8th, Hardiman on the 3rd, Kethledge on the 6th, Scythe on the 7th, and Pryor on the 11th. The likely GOP presidential nominee first promised to release the list in March, when his then rival, Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, accused him of not being a true conservative and warned Republicans that Trump would appoint liberal judges to the court. At the time, Trump said he was working with the Conservative Heritage Foundation to formulate a list of potential nominees, and that, if elected president, he would pick only from that list. President Obama has nominated U.S. Circuit Judge Merrick B. Garland to succeed Scalia, but Senate Republicans are refusing to consider him. I'm going to submit a list of justices, potential justices of the United States Supreme Court, that I will appoint from the list. I won't go beyond that list, Trump said at a news conference in Washington in late March. I'm going to let people know, because some people say, oh, maybe I'll appoint a liberal judge. I'm not appointing a liberal judge. In releasing the list Wednesday, the candidate made clear that it only pertains to the seat formerly occupied by Scalia. The campaign said in a statement that this list was compiled first and foremost based on constitutional principles, with input from highly respected conservatives and Republican Party leadership.
Dateline Hong Kong. The heart of this global financial hub resembled an armed camp on Wednesday as thousands of police officers deployed around a hotel and convention center where a senior Chinese official was visiting. For many in Hong Kong, the show of force only increased their fears that the city's civil liberties and autonomy are under assault by the government in Beijing. Across the Taiwan Strait, final preparations were underway for the inauguration on Friday of Tsai Ing-wen, Taiwan's first female president. She was swept into power in part by young voters anxious about what they see as Beijing's rising influence over the island. Ms. Tsai is expected to have a far more cautious attitude toward promoting Chinese trade and investment than her predecessor. It is a humbling week for China, the world's second biggest economy after the United States. It is richer and stronger than ever, and its financial clout is being felt the world over. But Beijing is finding it exceedingly difficult to win hearts and minds in its own backyard among the more than 30 million Chinese-speaking people of Taiwan and Hong Kong. China is searching for a new approach toward both Hong Kong and Taiwan, but it has yet to find one that is different from policies it has used before. Hardline political tactics that provoke resentment and pragmatic appeals to economic interests that fall short in societies where the benefit of trade with the mainland are unevenly distributed. There are more centrifugal forces, and it's hard for Beijing to deal with these forces, said Jean-Pierre Cabestany, a professor of government and international studies at Hong Kong Baptist University. I think it is a clash between two political cultures, authoritarianism in China and liberal in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Hong Kong is very much the bridge resisting the authoritarian political culture in China. In important ways, the visiting Chinese official in Hong Kong, Zhang Dejiang, is representative of that culture. As chairman of China's legislature, the National People's Congress, he presided over the August 2014 decision to set strict rules on vetting candidates for Hong Kong's top official post, the chief executive, leading to the huge protests that year that captured the world's attention. He is the highest ranking member of the Chinese government to visit the city since then. But Mr. Zhang, age 69, is also remembered in Hong Kong as the Communist Party chief of neighboring Guangdong province in 2003, when the outbreak of severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, swept over China. He was criticized for the slow response for the outbreak and for official efforts to keep the news of the deadly virus out of the media. The disease spread to Hong Kong, killing 269 people. Such attitudes, a fear of democracy, and heavy-handed control of the news media are at odds with the increasingly well-educated populations in Hong Kong, a former British colony, where civil liberties like freedom of speech and freedom of assembly are guaranteed, and Taiwan, a democracy for the past 2 decades. Those concerns erupted late last year when 5 Hong Kong booksellers disappeared, showing up later in Chinese custody in Guangdong. One publisher, Li Bo, was plucked from the streets of Hong Kong. The one country, two systems principle that safeguards the city's autonomy until 2047, the 50th anniversary of its return to Chinese sovereignty. That act is like driving a truck through one country, two systems, Emily Lau, head of the Democratic Party in Hong Kong's legislature, said in a telephone interview. Hong Kong is going through very dark times. Mrs. Lau and several other pro-democracy lawmakers met with Mr. Zhang at a reception on Wednesday evening, telling him that the city's chief executive, Liu Chang-ying, should be dismissed. Ms. Leung was standing next to Mr. Zhang at the time, Mr. Lau said. Ms. Lau and her colleagues also urged Mr. Zhang to revisit the issue of democratic elections for the chief executive post. They argued that opening up the position to a genuine contest rather than allowing only a narrow slate of Beijing-approved candidates would help to damp growing enthusiasm in Hong Kong for self-determination and even independence, she said by telephone. People are very, very frustrated And that's why some, including young people, are looking for a way out, including independence, Ms. Lau told Mr. Zhang. She said he responded that Beijing was satisfied with the performance of the Hong Kong government and that people had different points of view. I think he got the message loud and clear, she said. Earlier in the day, Mr. Zhang spoke at a conference in Hong Kong promoting China's plan to forge better infrastructure links with Asia and Europe called One Belt, One Road. Concerned that some of the newly radicalized groups in Hong Kong might try to disrupt Mr. Zhang's visit, the first by a member of the elite Politburo Standing Committee since 2012, led to extraordinary security measures. At least 6,000 police officers were enlisted to provide security around the city's convention center. Streets were sealed off, and city employees even glued down some paving bricks on sidewalks after rioters in February threw the bricks at police officers. He must feel fearful and guilty, so he needs such high security and fears any contact with the people, said Raphael Wong, vice chairman of the Pro-Democracy League at Social Democrats, whose members had assembled in one of the designated protest zones blocks away from where Mr. Zhang was staying. He simply couldn't tolerate any dissent against the Communist Party. The Communist Party also would not tolerate Taiwan's declaring independence and has repeatedly vowed to take that island by force should that happen. A Pentagon report released last week stated that China is steadily building up its force across the Taiwan Strait. On Wednesday, 2 days before Ms. Tsai was to take office, the Chinese Ministry of Defense announced it had been conducting military exercise across from Taiwan involving air, sea, and land forces, though it added the exercises were not directed at any specific target. In recent months, China has taken several other steps that put pressure on Taiwan's incoming government. It extradited Taiwanese suspects in alleged telephone fraud schemes from Kenya and Malaysia, leading to protests by Taiwanese diplomats. It also resumed diplomatic relations with Gambia, which had previously recognized Taiwan. Beijing also appears to be stepping up pressure on international organizations not to accept Taiwan as a separate member. Although Ms. Tsai has promised to maintain the status quo with China, many in her Democratic Progressive Party, which captured the presidency in January elections and, for the first time, control of the legislature, support independence. Under the current president, Ma Ying-jeou of the Kuomintang or Nationalist Party, cross-strait economic ties have flourished, but Chinese intentions worried many in Taiwan who saw the closer relations as tools to advance Beijing's goal of political control. In early 2014, demonstrators, overwhelmingly young people, occupied Taiwan's legislature for 23 days to block the passage of a cross-strait trade agreement. Several of them traveled to Hong Kong, speaking out in support of Taiwan independence and a democratic Hong Kong in July 2014 at a demonstration in the heart of the city that served as a preview of the protests that autumn. Ultimately, in both Hong Kong and Taiwan, the generations now moving into positions of responsibility increasingly view themselves as separate from China, and that rise of identity politics could pose grave political challenges to Beijing, said Zhang Bolt, a professor of political science at Lingham University in Hong Kong. I feel like Hong Kong is like Taiwan more than 20 years ago, before we had free elections, said Sing Chung Hee-sing, a lawyer in the island's capital, Taipei. The young people in Hong Kong have realized the importance of freedom and elections. I hope they can raise their voices and let the mainland government know their feelings.
America is a nation on the brink of godlessness, says the Reverend Franklin Graham. On Wednesday, the son of evangelical preacher Billy Graham brought his Decision America tour to the steps of the Nebraska Capitol, where an estimated 3,200 people gathered to pray and pledge to vote. I have no hope for the Democratic Party, Graham said. I have no hope for the Republican Party. The only hope for our nation today is Almighty God. The most important thing we can do as Christians is pray. It is our only hope. Lincoln was the 24th stop on his 50 capital tour, urging all Christians to pray for America and its leaders and to promote biblical principles at home, in public, and at the ballot box. I'm concerned about our country as far as the direction it's going, said Emery Bashas of Plattsmouth. We've taken God out of everything, and that concerns me. We need God. Jacob Carr and Reggie Kroom brought 38 men from Omaha's Open Door Mission to the rally. It's very important that the men of God step up and take a stand for what we believe in, said Kroom. It is such an honor to participate in what the Lord is doing, said Sherry Lindholm, who came to Lincoln with 3 other women from Omaha's Lifegate Church. Ultimately, the healing will come from his heart and his hands. As citizens of this state and this country, we need his healing. The tour, which has drawn 1,000 to 8,000 people at each stop, is designed to unite Christians to pray and take a stand for their faith. This is about getting Christians to understand how dangerous of a position we are in, morally and spiritually. I believe God will take his hand off this country if we fail to pray and fail to vote, Graham said after the rally. During his speech, he read from Nehemiah 1, verse 2, in which the wall of Jerusalem has come down and its gates burned. The walls and gates protecting America's values are down and wide open, Graham said, allowing any wicked thoughts and activities to come and go. We are more concerned about political correctness than about God's truth and righteousness, he said. America has lost its moral compass, Graham said, citing abortion, same-sex marriage, and the transgender debate. America is being stripped of its biblical heritage and God-inspired foundations, he said. Secularism and communism are one and the same. Secularism is godless. Secularism is taking over our country. Every level of government is secular. It has crept in and taken root. The people who do this call themselves progressives. Look at what they stand for and believe. They want to make us a godless country and a godless society. If we take God out, he will leave. He blessed us more than any nation on earth, but his hand is being removed, and the only thing we can do is pray and go vote. Decision America does not endorse any candidate or party, and elected officials are not allowed to speak on the tour. Instead, Graham pushes the message that Christians must vote their consciences and make their voices and values heard, even if they don't like any candidate. When you go to the polls for some elections, you will have to hold your nose, he said. You may have to vote for the least of 2 heathens. We will lose this country if you don't vote. The enemy is already at the gate. We have allowed the moral walls to deteriorate and fall down. We must surrender ourselves to God, elect men and women who will lead the nation into being one nation under God.
On April 4, a terse letter signed by the heads of the major education lobbying organizations in Washington, teachers' unions, school boards, superintendents, principals, and governors landed on the desk of John King Jr., the Secretary of Education. It had been less than 3 weeks since the Senate had confirmed Mr. King, a former high school teacher and education commissioner in New York. Yet, as the letter showed, he had already seemingly managed to irk the entire school establishment, as well as the Republican majority in Congress. His offense? Trying to make good on a long, unkept promise to the nation's low-income school children that they should receive as much education funding as everybody else. A few months before this clash, Congress had finished renewing the omnibus federal education law, known as the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, after years of difficult negotiations. The next move was for the Education Department to issue regulations detailing how provisions of the law were to be put in place. The department proposed a rule that would require local school districts to give schools enrolling large numbers of poor children at least as much state and local money as other schools, thus prompting the letter. Equal funding doesn't sound too crazy, yet many districts currently fall short. Nationwide, districts with high levels of poverty receive $1,200 less per pupil from the state and local sources than districts with low levels of poverty. Marguerite Rosa, a Georgetown University scholar, has found that many districts spend up to a third less per pupil in poor schools compared with others. This can happen for various reasons, because wealthy parents unduly influence budget allocation, for example. It can also happen because most teachers are paid using collectively bargained salary schedules that reward longevity. Senior teachers tend to cluster in wealthy schools. Less well-off schools often churn through large numbers of novice, badly paid teachers. But fixing such funding inequalities can be expensive as well as disruptive to long-standing arrangements of which teachers get to be in which schools. That's why the unions, districts, and state leaders wrote the letter urging Mr. King to refrain from defining terms and aspects of the new law, the essence of regulation, especially as it relates to the supplement, not supplant provision. Supplement, not supplant, is a key element in the Education Act, going back to the earliest version of the law enacted 5 decades ago as part of President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, and the roots of controversy stretch back that far as well. The most expensive and important part of the law was, and still is, Title I, which provides federal grants to local school districts based upon how many low-income students are enrolled. Districts are required to spend the federal money on the schools where more of the poor children are. The whole point of Title I is that low-income children have extra barriers to learning that require extra resources to overcome. The authors of the original law were wary of administrators in local districts, many of whom were actively discriminated against minority school children. Because more than 90% of school revenue comes from state and local sources, lawmakers worried that districts would play a shell game with new Title I funds, transferring $1 of local resources to rich schools from poor ones for every new federal dollar earmarked for poor schools that arrived. A 1969 report from the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund found examples of exactly that. As a result, Congress amended the law in 1970 to thwart such maneuvers. It required districts to spend Title I dollars on additional education for poor children above and beyond what they already received from other sources. That is, to supplement, not to supplant. But from the start, the rule proved hard to enforce since few districts maintained separate bank accounts and accounting ledgers for each school. In 2015, lawmakers prohibited the department from requiring a specific methodology for distributing state and local funds. The department's proposed rule, the one that prompted the lobbyist letter, affirmed that districts could decide for themselves how to distribute money among schools, whether based on head counts, student-to-teacher ratios, a percentage increase over the previous year's school budget, or anything else. However, the result of the methodology had to be that the district spent at least as much state and local money in each Title I school as in non-Title I schools. That had to be the non-negotiable starting point. Otherwise, how could title money, by any reasonable definition of the word, be considered extra? The department did not mention teacher salaries, but they make up the bulk of school budgets and would thus be included in calculations of spending. Normally, teachers' unions and school advocates support Democratic politicians and are the mortal enemies of conservative Republicans. Yet this time, they found an enthusiastic supporter in Senator Lamar Alexander, Republican of Tennessee and chairman of the Senate Education Committee. He's generally opposed to federal regulation of education on principle, regardless of the issue. In this way, left-leaning interest groups like local teachers' unions are ideologically aligned with Tea Party Republicans. The week after the lobbyist letter, Mr. Alexander hauled Mr. King into a public hearing and dressed him down. Citing a different provision, he said, "The law specifically says that the school district shall not include teacher pay when they measure spending for purpose of comparability. If Mr. King refused to back down, he would encourage states to sue Mr. Alexander said. The Education Department's rule is now in a period of public debate by stakeholders. While the particulars may seem technical, the underlying issue is large. It comes down to whether the federal government will require states and districts that voluntarily accept federal funds to use their own money fairly, a crucial question as students and teachers are held accountable for meeting exacting new education standards like the Common Core. In late April, a coalition of civil rights organizations, including the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, the Children's Defense Fund, and the National Council of La Raza, delivered their own letter to Mr. King supporting the new rule. The original ESEA was a civil rights law, Mr. King said, and President Obama believes the new ESEA builds on that civil rights legacy. Mr. King, the child of educators and an orphan by the time he was 12, credits his teachers in New York City public schools for helping him stay on track and achieve success. But even today in Queens, for example, a poor school gets 29% less money than a wealthy school nearby, he said, adding that it is unfair and could mean less art, music, and college counseling. Those things, he said, can determine a child's future.
Killer's sister in pain for victims' families. Tracy Heritage said she is devastated for the families of Tina Jensen and Norma Voges, the two women her brother Ronald Heritage killed before shooting himself in his Northeast Lincoln home last weekend. In a letter sent to the Journal-Star Wednesday, she said her brother's actions left her heartbroken and in disbelief. My feelings are he should have killed himself if he needed to, but taking those beautiful women with him is unbearable, she wrote. He knew it, too. Members of Jensen's family found her body and those of Voges and Ronald Blake Heritage inside the house at 6715 Bethany Park Drive Sunday after going to check on her, police said. Investigators believe he shot the two multiple times before killing himself. Lincoln Police Chief Jeff Blymeister said Ronald Heritage bought the gun legally in 2015. Tracy Heritage, who lives in Colorado, wrote in her letter titled From Ronnie's Sister that she didn't know he had one. If there hadn't been a gun, no one would be dead, she wrote, adding that she believes her brother, who had bouts of depression, wouldn't have had the courage to kill Voges and Jensen any other way. Still, she said, she doesn't fault anyone for selling him a gun because there was no way to know he would do this. Ronald Heritage seemed older than his 50 years, his only sister said. Withdrawn and serious at times, but soft and sincere at others. Now I know I didn't know him well enough, not well enough to step in and help, or well enough to know I needed to. Tracy Heritage called the killings senseless and unimaginable. We will have an impossible time in forgiving Ronnie, she wrote. We understand if you do, too. UNL student jailed for felony DUI. A 24-year-old college senior who drunkenly crashed into a mailbox, a parked car, an SUV in a driveway, and finally a tree got 180 days in jail Tuesday for third offense DUI. Trevor A. Wright was told to report to jail May 24. He'll be able to apply for release to go to his classes at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. He hopes to graduate in December. When he was arrested on April 1, 2015, Wright's blood alcohol tested at 0.289%, roughly 3.5 times the legal limit to drive, police said. Since then, he has completed inpatient treatment and has been living in a three-quarter house, a sober environment seen as a final step to independent living, for almost 10 months. In court Tuesday, Wright told Lancaster County District Judge Robert Otte he has made drastic changes in the way he lives and came to realize that if he didn't deal with it now, he might not get a chance later. Deputy Lancaster County Attorney Don Zieg asked the judge to send the message that DUIs aren't something minor. And Otte said his first instinct was to send Wright to prison. But he said Wright has done more than almost anyone he's seen to turn around his life, and he wanted to recognize that. He sentenced Wright to 6 months in jail, revoked his license for 15 years, and ordered him to pay a $1,000 fine.
Dateline Vienna. When Secretary of State John Kerry traveled on Wednesday to the presidential palace in Egypt, ostensibly the United States' closest Arab ally and the recipient of billions of dollars in American aid, the reporters traveling with him were left behind at the airport. The Egyptian authorities made clear, State Department officials said, that reporters like myself would not be welcome at the presidential palace, apparently out of fear we might ask President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi a question or two about the dissidents he has jailed. Instead, only photographers and videographers would be permitted inside to record the ritual handshake between Mr. Kerry and Mr. Sisi, images that will suggest all is right between the authoritarian former general who leads Egypt and the nation that provides him with F-16s, helicopters, and tanks, as well as riot control equipment that human rights groups say may be used to facilitate Egypt's crackdown against activists. In fact, this meeting comes down against a backdrop of increasing tension over Washington's $1.3 billion in annual military aid to Egypt, which in recent years has been dwarfed by inflows to the country from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The State Department has lately been unable to obtain answers to its questions about whether any equipment bought with American dollars has been used by Egyptians to violate human rights, according to a blistering 77-page report issued last week by the Government Accountability Office. After more than 2 decades of traveling with American presidents and chief diplomats on visits to places that have included some of the world's most repressive nations, I am used to watching leaders disappear behind closed doors. But not being even allowed to see the doors closed set something of a new standard. State Department officials said that once they learned reporters would be barred from the palace, they never even requested visas for us so we could, as is customary, follow Mr. Kerry into the Capitol for his 2 to 3 hour visit. Instead, those who made the long trip were stuck in a lounge at the airport. I decided to stay behind in Vienna and meet up with the Secretary's entourage this weekend in Myanmar, where he is meeting with Dawn Aung San Suu Kyi, who emerged from a long house arrest to become leader of the new government. There have been hints that we will have some access. The contrast between Myanmar, once the world's most closed societies, and Egypt made me revisit my recent travels with Mr. Kerry in terms of what restrictions were placed on us journalists. In November, Mr. Kerry zipped through Central Asia on a tour of some of the world's most repressive states, including Turkmenistan, whose leadership shares Mr. Sisi's approach to anyone who utters a thought the government finds distasteful. Still, President Gurbanguly Bermanakah allowed international reporters to record his encounters with Mr. Kerry, though local Turkmen journalists were kept at a far remove. The King of Bahrain, who knows a thing or two about clearing the streets of critics, and invited reporters in for the start of his meeting with Mr. Kerry last month, and with a deep understanding of how to keep them docile, fed them at the palace before they were packed off. Even China's leaders routinely let the news media pool in, though they do their best to ignore them. Egypt used to do the same in what now looks by comparison like the days of openness when Hosni Mubarak was still president. Mr. Mubarak was not known for tolerating much criticism before he was deposed and never would have won an award from Transparency International. But he let reporters record his meeting with President Obama in 2009 when Mr. Obama made a trip to Cairo for a landmark speech about the future of the Arab world that reads today like the trail of broken dreams. Even as the aging Mr. Mubarak fell from power, pushed partly by Mr. Obama in phone calls during the Tahrir Square protest, he showed some savvy about Western news media. During one of his last visits to Washington, Mr. Mubarak invited me and a few other reporters to his hotel suite to talk about the Middle East future and about his differences with the Obama administration. For those of us trying to divine the day-to-day working of American foreign policy, there are certain accepted rituals that make up the everyday fabric of diplomatic reporting. The journalists on Mr. Curry's small plane, an older Boeing 757 that he despises, usually depart from the rear door, hopping into a van that joins the back of his motorcade, and catch a glimpse of the start of most meetings. Sometimes after these private chats, we were ferried back into a ceremonial room and to ask questions, even uncomfortable ones. On rare occasions, we even receive answers. Tuesday in Vienna, where Mr. Kerry held talks on Syria, was typical. Two old American adversaries, happily or not, subjected themselves to our inquiries. First came Foreign Minister Sergei V. Lavrov of Russia, who answered and avoided questions at a half-an-hour news conference. Then Mr. Curry traveled to the Coburg Palace, where he had negotiated the final stages of the Iran nuclear deal for a month last summer to see Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad. Mr. Sy took power in Egypt in 2013 after what was viewed by many around the world as a coup against Mohamed Morsi, who had been elected after Mr. Mubarak's ouster, and led a crackdown in which more than 1,000 Egyptians were killed and thousands more were imprisoned. In its report, the Government Accountability Office has said the Defense Department has been unable to conduct in-use monitoring on missiles and nighttime devices before 2015. And even though the checks were done in 2015, the report said the State Department had been unable to vet the training and equipping of the military for possible human rights violations. I would love to have asked Mr. Kerry and Mr. Sisi about that estimate at the presidential palace on Wednesday, if only reporters had been allowed in.
Following are the obituaries from the Lincoln Journal-Star. Blum, Darrell I. Blum, age 84, of York, formerly of Waco, a veteran. Memorials may be directed to Mission Central and Gary Thies, or to St. John's Lutheran Church in Waco. Condolences may be left for the family at www.metsmortuary.com. Fink, Margaret E. Fink, age 93, of Hebron. Memorials to the Church Cemetery Fund. The church is Sacred Heart Church of Hebron. Arrangements by Price Funeral Home of Hebron. Jensen, Christina A. Tina Jensen, age 53, of Lincoln. Memorials in lieu of flowers to the family for Tina's Grandchildren's Educational Fund. Roper and Sons Chapel, 4300 O Street. Bowers, Harold B. Burns Bowers, DDS, 83, a friend, a veteran. Memorials to the United Church of Christ in Friend, or the Friend Country Club. Lauber Moore Funeral Home of Friend. Mercer, Marion McDonald Mercer, age 91, a resident of Sun Lakes, Arizona. A burial was held at Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln on May 18. Any remembrances can be made to your favorite church or charity. Colonial Chapel Funeral Home. Cassini, Dr. Brett Ranford Cassini, age 59, of Lincoln, passed away May 17, pending obituary to follow. Condolences at www.wyuka.com. Coleman, Wilbur Gene Coleman of Lincoln, a veteran. In lieu of flowers, memorials may be accorded to Tabitha Medical Center or the Marine Corps League. Butheris Mesa and Love. Lucas, Letitia M. Lucas, age 36, of Lincoln. Memorials may be left for the family. Online condolences may be left at www.wyuka.com. Parker, Wilbur L. Parker, age 87, a veteran. Kramer Funeral Home, 63rd and Maple Street, Omaha. Bailey, Dwayne T. Bailey, age 71, of Omaha. Funeral service will be 10 a.m. Thursday at Salem Lutheran Church in Fremont. Gondolfi, Robert E. Gondolfi, age 79, of Lincoln, a veteran. Memorials to Calvary United Methodist Church, 11th and Garfield, Lincoln Memorial Funeral Home. McKinney, Jean E. McKinney, age 90, of Lincoln. In lieu of flowers, the family suggests donations to the Steamboat Rock Veterans Memorial Monument Fund, Lincoln Memorial Funeral Home. Fisher, Helen L. Fisher, age 82, of Lincoln, Roper and Sons. Mickey, David H. Mickey, age 98, of Lincoln, a veteran. Memorials to Nebraska Wesleyan University David H. Mickey Student Scholarship Fund, Roper and Sons. Yetter, Mary Lee Yetter, Lee Epiloti, age 78, of Lincoln, passed away April 2, 2016. Lee moved to Sun Lakes, Arizona in 1994 and lived there for the remainder of her life. Ilg, Vera V. Ilg, age 94, of Waverly. Memorials are suggested to the church, which is First United Methodist Church of Waverly, Butheris Mason and Love Funeral Home. Kazmersik, Michael M. Kazmersik, Jr., age 47, of Lincoln. Memorials to the family, Roper and Sons. Engel, Shirley Beth Engel, of Lincoln, Roper and Sons. Procish, Thomas L. Procish, of Lincoln, born in 1920, a veteran. In lieu of flowers, memorials to the church, which is Cathedral of the Risen Christ, 3500 Sheridan Boulevard, or Boy Scout Troop 54, Butheris Mason and Love Funeral Home. Svatos, Todd Allen Svatos, age 49, of Lincoln, a veteran. In lieu of flowers, memorials to the family, Butheris Mason and Love Funeral Home. Tomasek, Gerald John Tomasek, age 84, of Lincoln, a veteran. Memorials to St. Mark's Church, Matt Talbot Kitchen and Outreach, or Multiple Sclerosis, Roper and Sons. Lamb, May V. Lamb, age 95, of Unadilla. Memorials are suggested to the Unadilla United Methodist Church or Unadilla Fire and Rescue. Fusselman Allen Harvey Funeral Home of Syracuse. Sladek, Janice Betty Cerveni Sladek, age 69, of Crete. Memorials, care of the family for future designation, Kunzel Funeral Home of Crete. Matthews, Cecil K. Matthews, age 82, of Blue Springs, a veteran. Laughlin Hovet Funeral Home of Wymore.
The following are the obituaries from the Omaha World Herald. Anderson, Deanna G. Anderson, age 66, of Omaha, Brahman Mortuary, 72nd Street, Chapel. Baki Lindstrom, Mary Lynn Bauman, born February of 1953, in lieu of flowers, memorials to the American Cancer Society, Forest Lawn Funeral Home, 7909 Mormon Bridge Road. Bear, H. John Bear, born 1948, a veteran. Memorials to St. Mary's Guild, Bellevue Memorial Chapel, Heafy, Hoffman, Dwart, Cutler, 2202 Hancock Street, Bellevue. Balkan, Mary E. Balkan, born 1956. Memorials to the American Cancer Society, John A. Gentleman Mortuaries and Crematory, Pacific Street Chapel, 14151 Pacific Street. Burgess, Pee Wee Gerald T. Burgess, born 1943, a veteran, Westlawn Hillcrest Funeral Home, 5701 Center Street. Foreman, Marie M. Turek Foreman, born 1921, Corisco Larkin Statskowitz Funeral Home, 5108 F Street. Gintz, Josephine Gintz, born 1932. Memorials may be directed to the family. Heafy Hoffman Dwyer Cutler, 5108 F Street. Harris, Gerald Harris, born 1940, age 75 of Omaha. Brahman Mortuary, 72nd Street Chapel. Hartwell, Barbara Jean Hartwell, age 89, from Council Bluffs, Iowa. Family has suggested memorials to Hospice of Southwest Iowa and St. Peter's Church. Cutler O'Neill Meyer Woodring, Bayless Park Chapel, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Holmes, Francis Philip Holmes, born 1925, Maher Funeral Home, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Janicek, Robert J. Janicek, born 1928, a veteran. In lieu of memorials, send flowers from Janicek Florist to someone you love. Johnny Gentleman Mortuaries and Crematory, 72nd Street Chapel. Castill, Marion M. Castill, a complete notice later, Corisco Larkin Statskowitz Funeral Home, 5108 F Street. Klosterbrewer, Maynard Henry Klosterbrewer, born 1937. Private interment, memorials to Westwood Community Church, Heafy Hoffman Dwyer Cutler, 5108 Street Chapel. Larkin, Norma Jean Larkin, born 1930. In lieu of flowers, please send memorial donations to the Eastern Memorial Veterans Home. John A. Gentleman Mortuaries and Crematory, Pacific Street Chapel. Lane, Frank M. Lane, born 1919, a veteran. Memorials may be made to the New Horizon Presbyterian Church, the Council Bluffs Public Library, Hospice with Heart, or the Alzheimer Association, Cutler O'Neill Meyer Woodring, Bayless Park Chapel, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Loringer, Dennis J. Loringer, complete notice later, Heafy Hoffman Dwyer Cutler, 5108 F Street Chapel. Meyer, Charles Meyer, age 82, of Columbus. In lieu of flowers, memorials may be sent to Nebraska Lutheran Outdoor Ministries for camperships, 27416 Ranch Road, Ashland, Nebraska. Gass Haney Funeral Home, Columbus, Nebraska. Meyer, Jim W. Meyer, age 83, a veteran. The family will direct memorials toward conservation in his honors. Hoy Kilnosky Funeral Home and Crematory, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Meyer, Joan M. Meyer, born 1920. Memorials to St. Joan of Arc Catholic Church, Heafy Hoffman Dwyer Cutler, 5108 F Street. Mulando, Ishmael Zach Mulando, age 53, of Council Bluffs, Iowa. Mayor Funeral Home, 121 South 7th Street, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Noringer, Elizabeth Betty Noringer, born 1926. Memorials to St. Paul United Methodist Church or Crowell Memorial Home, Blair, Nebraska. Arbor Cremation Society, 2819 South 125th Avenue, Suite 367, Omaha. O'Flynn, Timothy P. O'Flynn, born 1938, complete notice later, Heafy Hoffman Dwyer Cutler, 5108 F Street. Palmer, Paul Palmer, born 1950, Roeder Mortuary, Ames Chapel. Parker, Wilbur L. Parker, age 87, a veteran, Kramer Funeral Home, 6302 Maple Street. Quinlan Gerald L. Jerry Quinlan, born 1961, of Omaha, Brahman Mortuary, 72nd Street Chapel. Robinson Joshua W. Robinson, born 1986, of Omaha. A memorial service will be held May 23, 2016 at 11 a.m. at Offutt Air Force Base, Cape Heart Chapel in Bellevue. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Severin Allen E. Severin, born 1937, a veteran. In lieu of flowers, memorials to Mount View Presbyterian Church, Roeder Mortuary, 108th Street Chapel. Shiflett Audrey Jean Shiflett, born 1942, Kaler Dolch Mortuary, Papillion, Nebraska. Stump Charles Dwayne Stump, born 1940, age 75, of Plattsmouth. Memorials to the Plattsmouth Volunteers Firefighters Association, Roby Funeral Home, Plattsmouth, Nebraska. Steno Marie K. Steno, age 93, of Elkhorn. Memorials to St. Patrick's Parish, Elkhorn, Reichmuth Funeral Home, 21901 West Maple Street. Stessman Ted J. Stessman, born 1930, a veteran. Memorials are suggested to St. Bernard School, St. Joan of Arc School, or Creighton Prep High School. Heafy Hoffman Dwart Cutler, 5108 F Street. Zavatos Todd Allen Zavatos, age 49, of Lincoln, Nebraska, a veteran. In lieu of flowers, memorials to the family. Bathoris Master and Love Funeral Home, Lincoln, Nebraska. Youngman Linda Louise Inman Youngman, born 1948, of Elkhorn, Nebraska. Memorials to the Mission K9 Rescue, 3529 Old Concert Joe Road, Suite 11, Newbury Park, California, or online through PayPal at musco.com. Heafy Hoffman Dwart Cutler, 5108 F Street. Listeners' memorials to Radio Talking Book Network are tax deductible and will go a long way in keeping Radio Talking Book on the air. Please keep Radio Talking Book in mind when memorials are listed as donor's choice or your favorite charity. Donations should be sent to Radio Talking Book Network, 7101 Newport Avenue, Suite 205, Omaha, Nebraska, 68152. Thank you for being a Radio Talking Book Network listener and supporter.
Outstanding.
I'm just an exciting news for everybody out there. Well, to me, it's exciting. I will be over at the Peony Park IE, 3910 Street, from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. We come Saturday, maybe we'll come Thursday. I am going to be out talking with Bill Randy and the weather crew from KETV and they're going to be out there showing everybody how the weather radio works. They're going to be setting them up for people, and I would like to tell everybody out there that the weather radio is something that we all need. I really believe in my heart that the blind and visually impaired persons out here in Nebraska, we definitely need it. I have one, and it's actually alerted me to different things that's going on in the area, and it's just great. I recommend that if you do not have one, please pick one up. Anyone can set it. But if you just happen to come out to Hy-Vee at 39 and Cass, Bill Randy and the weather crew will set it for you and show you different alarms for different things. Like I have one for lightning, and I have one for high winds, and he's got me set up with different sounds for the different types. So again, May the 21st, this coming Saturday, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., we will be at the Penny Park Arcade at 7910 Cat State, where we will be interviewing Will Randy.
Those trial subjects were interesting.
Yes.
Yes.
And buy one of these radios for $39. And very good, fantastic. Like I said before, I believe in my heart.
And they're alike for the whole country, aren't they?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Really need this because the work that the different weather changes and what's going on outside. Okay, guys, I hope so much to see you out there. Have fun and enjoy your shopping.
All right. That is your break for you. I want you to remember that this is your Radio Talking Book Network, your print information network, serving Nebraska and its neighboring states. The Radio Talking Book Network is brought to you in cooperation from KIOSFM in Omaha and statewide through the NEC Radio Network. Well, since that's the end of your break, that means it's time for your live reading again. So I'm going to hand it on over to the gentleman in the studio, and they're going to get started right off with your live reading for you.
Thanks, Emily. Our view from the Lincoln Journal-Star. Lincoln City Councilman Roy Christensen and Kobe Mack, CEO of the Lincoln Independent Business Association, are once again arguing that the city ought to hire more police officers. The Journal-Star editorial board generally agrees. Crime rates in the capital city are at historic lows, but the city continues to expand in size, adding 3.88 square miles since 2011. According to the most recent census figures, Lincoln has added nearly 15,000 residents in the last 5 years. Those changes justify a modest expansion in the size of the Lincoln police force. After several years in which the force was not expanded, the city added 4 police officers in the last 2-year budget cycle. That might be a good starting point for negotiations on spending during the next 2-year budget cycle. But we wish that discussion would not focus too intensely on the ratio of police officers to population. In the news conference at which Christensen and Mock promoted more spending on public safety, they cited the current ratio of 1.17 Lincoln police officers for every 1,000 residents in the capital city, compared to the national average of ratio 1.6 officers per 1,000 for cities of a similar size. Lincolnites should keep several things in mind when considering the ratio. First, as we have mentioned in previous years, the International Order of Police Chiefs says the ratio of officers per 1,000 is totally inappropriate. On its website, the organization points out defining patrol staffing allocation and deployment requirements is a complex endeavor which requires consideration of an extensive series of factors and a sizable body of reliable current data. Second, the ratio of police officers in Lincoln looks better if the more than 30 university police officers at the University of Nebraska Lincoln campus are included. Then the ratio rises to 1.28 officers per 1,000. The University Police Department is an accredited law enforcement agency. It has more than 30 armed officers with full police and arrest powers. Another factor that Lincoln residents should consider is that spending on police officers is not the only way to improve public safety. It's also important to spend tax dollars on mental health treatment, for example. Residents should not be too concerned about some of the statistics that Mock cited in an alarm tone. For example, it's true that the crime clearance rate ticked downward from 2014 to 2015, but the difference was less than a percentage point, and the 25.1 clearance rate is still better than the department's goal of 24% and better than the national average of 23%. As always, the urge to hire more police officers must be balanced against other needs. This year, for example, the city should boost its contribution to the Police and Fire Pension Fund. In response to Christensen and Mock, Mayor Chris Beitler said, "The city is best served when we have a broader discussion that includes police, fire, and 911, as well as the other city services and programs that play a role in preventing crime, accidents, property damage, and other harm to our residents." We hope that Christensen and Mock agree.
The following is the lead editorial of the New York Times, and it's captioned, "Vladimir Putin's Dangerous Obsession." The United States and Russia are now proposing to drop food and other emergency aid from the air if President Bashar al-Assad of Syria does not allow trucks to deliver supplies to his besieged cities. Airdrops are a risky and desperate move, costly, hard to deliver accurately, and, if poorly targeted, a threat to kill or injure the people they are supposed to help. On the surface, the move seems a humanitarian gesture from two nations that are supposedly partners in ending Syria's bloody civil war. What it really does is highlight once again the duplicity of President Vladimir Putin of Russia in Syria and elsewhere. Mr. Assad remains in power largely because of Russian military assistance. It is hard to believe that Mr. Putin, who fancies himself a man who can get what he wants, could not persuade Mr. Assad to let aid get through the cities if he chose to try. While promising Secretary of State John Kerry that he would work with America to end the war that has reportedly killed up to 470,000 people, Mr. Putin has been unable or unwilling to stop Mr. Assad from shelling civilians and, according to reports, is continuing Russian airstrikes as well. A temporary ceasefire that raised hopes for a more durable peace has now largely collapsed. Talks between the Assad government and opposition forces have broken down, and plans to begin a negotiated political transition to a more inclusive government by August 1 seems ever more remote. Syria is just one area where Mr. Putin's obsessive quest to make Russia great again has fueled instability and reawakened political suspicions and animosities that faded after the fall of the Soviet Union. A year after invading Ukraine and annexing Crimea in 2014, Russia signed an agreement in Minsk that was supposed to end the fighting. It is now violating that agreement. Violence between Ukrainian and Russian-backed separatist forces has reached its highest level since a 2015 ceasefire. Russia is also engaging in aggressive and dangerous behavior in the air and on the high seas. Last week, British fighter jets intercepted 3 Russian military transport aircraft approaching the Baltic states. On April 29, a Russian warplane came with 100 feet of an American fighter jet over the Baltic Sea and did a barrel roll over the jet, which could have been a catastrophe. 2 weeks earlier, 2 Russian warplanes flew 11 simulated attack passes near an American destroyer in the Baltic. All this risks direct confrontation with the United States. American military forces have gone out of their way to exercise restraint, but decisions on whether oncoming planes are a threat are made in an instant, and restraint cannot be assumed. Anxieties about Russia among NATO members in Eastern Europe had forced the alliance to make plans to deploy 4 combat battalions of roughly 1,000 troops each in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. 2 battalions will be American, 1 German, and 1 British. They aren't enough to repulse a Russian invasion, but NATO hopes they will deter Moscow from crossing alliance borders. NATO is also proceeding with a European missile defense system intended to protect against Iranian missiles. Last week, a base in Romania became operational and ground was broken for a base in Poland. More and bigger military exercises are also on the agenda. Mr. Putin has long misread NATO, which was significantly demilitarized after the Cold War as a threat. His more assertive behavior may produce exactly the reinvigorated alliance he feared, one that is much more serious about military spending despite problems with economic growth, Syrian refugees, and political dysfunction. NATO's 28 members will meet in Warsaw in July, a good time to reassert resolve. In June, sanctions imposed on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine will expire and will need to be renewed, though NATO members would be wise to keep the channels for dialogue with Russia open as well. Mr. Putin would have greatly improved his chances of regaining the international standing he craves had he diversified his country's economy and worked constructively with the West.
Dear GOP, it's time to bet on our horse by Sheldon Adelson, who is chairman and chief executive of Las Vegas Sands Corporation. He wrote this for the Washington Post. At the outset of the 2016 election, the GOP primary field was nearly as large as that of last weekend's Kentucky Derby. In total, 17 Republican hopefuls campaigned to win the party's nomination for president. Like the Derby, the race for the Republican nomination started from a wide gate, some entries with better post positions, others with more backing. We had candidates with such perceived advantages as wide name identification, large campaign war chests, supposed geographic benefits, and other assets they hoped would tip the race in their direction. Ultimately, each candidate had to convince the party's primary voters across the country that he or she deserved to be the nominee. One candidate has won that race, and now Republicans must join together to make sure he wins the next one. I am endorsing Trump's bid for president and strongly encourage my fellow Republicans, especially our Republican elected officials, party loyalists and operatives, and those who provide important financial backing to do the same. The alternative to Trump being sworn in as the nation's 45th president is frightening. For nearly 8 years, Republicans have fought tooth and nail against President Barack Obama and his policies. We waged battles over debt, government spending, Obamacare, and the Iran nuclear deal, an issue of paramount importance to me personally and to many others around the world. We gained some victories, but on too many issues, Obama achieved his goals, if not necessarily America's goals. As Republicans, we know that getting a person in the White House with an R behind his name is the only way things will get better. That opportunity still exists. We must not cut off our noses to spite our faces. If Republicans do not come together in support of Trump, Obama will essentially be granted something the Constitution does not allow, a third term in the name of Hillary Clinton. I've spent time talking to Donald Trump. Do I agree with him on every issue? No, but it's unlikely that any American agrees with his or her preferred candidate on every issue. After the 2012 election cycle, I was asked frequently what I would look for in a future presidential contender. While I had some personal preferences because of friendships with some of the 2016 candidates, I kept coming back to the issue of executive experience. In my view, a governor of a state is ideally qualified to be president. A governor is a state's final decision maker, is chief executive and steward of the public's money. I felt strongly that someone with that level of CEO experience would be well trained for the job of president. It turns out that is exactly what we are getting in Trump. He is a candidate with actual CEO experience, shaped and molded by the commitment and risk of his own money rather than the public's. He is a CEO success story that exemplifies the American spirit of determination, commitment to cause, and business stewardship. Despite being the grandson of a Welsh coal miner and the son of a Boston cab driver, I've had the remarkable experience of being part of almost 50 different businesses in my more than a 70-year business career. So tell me I'm not a conservative enough Republican, or I'm too hawkish on Israel, or whatever else you may think. But I think I've earned the right to talk about success and leadership. You may not like Trump's style or what he says on Twitter, but this country needs strong executive leadership more today than at almost any point in its history. The world is less secure than ever, and our allies have lost confidence in our ability to lead. The economy is not growing the way it should. The middle class is finding it harder and harder to get by. Trump has created a movement in this country that cannot be denied. He will end this primary election cycle having garnered more Republican primary votes for president than anyone before. But some Republicans are sitting on the sidelines, threatening to stay home on election day, or worse, suggesting they will vote for Clinton. They must realize the stakes are too high for an outcome that will have a damaging impact on our country. Republicans have the candidate who the people decided is our winner from a field of 17 viable contenders. It's time for all Republicans to mount up and back our nominee.
The following on the editorial page is written by Emily Winslow, and it's captioned "The Saga of My Rape Kit" from Cambridge, England. My rape kit was created on the evening of Sunday, January 12, 1992, at Magee Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh. Tiny pieces of evidence were swabbed, plucked, and combed from me, bits of me, and they hoped bits of him, to be used in court one day to prove who had done this to me. Like many evidence kits collected at the time, it was not analyzed for DNA and became part of what is called the backlog, untested rape kits across the country, which number at minimum in the tens of thousands. I had been raped by a stranger. This was not unusual, according to a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article from 1990. In only about half of Pittsburgh's rapes was the assailant known to the victim. My evidence was not analyzed for DNA, even though the technology was available, not because my case was deemed unworthy of the time, money, and effort, but because there was no one to whom to compare the results. It was only in the late 90s that the FBI database of criminal DNA samples, now known as the Combined DNA Index System, became, and it's called CODIS, became fully operational. Until then, DNA evidence from rapes without suspects was not useful. Nevertheless, it was collected and stored with hopes for the future. I badgered the Pittsburgh Police Sex Assault Unit about my case every few years for more than 2 decades. They finally tested my kit in 2013. It took months and cost the county $4,000, but it proved more than worthwhile. A match was made with an ex-convict who had recently been arrested in Brooklyn, and prosecution was mobilized. While I was frustrated that I had to fight to get my kit out of storage, I understand that my old rape kit was competing with murders and with more recent rapes. There weren't the resources to do more without compromising the current caseload. I'm just deeply grateful that my kit was created in the first place and that it was kept so well. No, not just physically well, so as to be still testable after all that time, but also with an intact chain of custody that protected its status as legitimate evidence. There is a justified impression that the backlog of untested rape kits is at least in part a result of indifference on the part of the police and others in authority, dismissing rape as unworthy of prosecution. But this part of the backlog, made of pre-CODIS kits like mine, was a result of forward-thinking and diligent police and medical personnel who cared so much about rape that they collected and kept evidence that they, at the time, without a database to match up to, would not themselves get to take to court. In 2015, grants from the federal government and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office totaling $79 million were aimed at testing the national backlog. But it's still common for kits, especially older kits, to fall through the cracks. In layman's understanding, backlog refers to all untested kits, but in some jurisdictions, it can refer only to kits that have made it into the crime lab testing queue and not yet been gotten to. Evidence kits that went directly to storage can be left out of these numbers entirely. Even when crime labs intend to include stored kits in their numbers, that is not necessarily easy to do. A lab can test only those kits that the police submit to it. In Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, for example, where my kit was tested and which was granted $254,000 last year to clear its backlog evidence, storage is split among many different authorities. The county police, the Pittsburgh police, and small police jurisdictions for more than 100 municipalities outside Pittsburgh. The Allegheny County lab requires the initiative of dozens of different forces just to count the kits. The grant money is providing the means to get known kits tested. It's my hope that it will also, in every jurisdiction that accepts the money, provide the impetus to uncover the older kits that could be so easily overlooked. Some of these pre-CODIS kits will be from cases past their statute of limitations. Depending on details, they may or not be prosecutable. Now, I can't speak for any victims other than myself, but for me, the identification of my attacker was by itself a significant event in my life, separate from the prosecution that followed. To learn who he was is important. To see my case at last taken as far as it could go by the police and prosecutors was important. It turned out to be too late for some things, but it was not too late to acknowledge me, to respect me, and to help me. When the backlog grants were announced last year, Attorney General Loretta E. Lynch said, "For anyone who has felt isolated and afraid, left out and left behind as a result of a sexual crime, our message is clear. We will not forget you. We will not abandon you. You are not alone." This is important to say to every victim, not just those whose cases can be prosecuted, not just those whose evidence is easier to find, not just those with evidence already in line at the lab.
Dear Amy, my husband and I have been married for 3 years. We jumped through many hoops in order to be together. I thought we would be totally devoted to each other until the end of our lives. We are both in our 60s. A few months after we got married, I discovered that my husband was communicating with a hooker through email. He was asking her to send him porn. He said he would travel to see her and was just generally flirting with her. I found her phone number in his phone contacts. I suspect they were having phone sex and going to chat rooms together. When confronted with the evidence, he said he was just flirting with her to get porn from her. He said there was no phone sex or chatting, just the 4 or 5 emails that I saw. He begged my forgiveness and promised that nothing like this would ever happen again. I have no reason to believe he has broken that promise. He is a good man, and other than this one incident, he has been a wonderful mate. I was devastated by this breach of trust and have spent the past year trying to cope with my feelings of anger and hurt. I'm so disappointed in him. Am I making too much out of this incident? Would you consider this cheating? That's the way it feels to me. Signed, Broken. Dear Broken, I'm not sure I would take this behavior as evidence of cheating, but it is probably evidence of stupidity. You should assume that your husband has done this before and could still be corresponding with other people. You should try to determine if he has spent money on this woman, if it even is a woman, or if it could be someone communicating, it could be anybody communicating with him. It is possible that your husband fell for a scam where he was basically catfished and drawn into a cyber relationship where the ultimate goal was to get him to pay for porn or, in rare cases, to actually pay for the relationship to go away once it became burdensome or once you found out about it. Because of this breach of your trust, not to mention this breach of logic and good sense, he needs to be 100% transparent about all of his communication and finances. You should meet with a marriage counselor with transparency and healing as your goal. You can recover from this, but he needs to participate in the process. Dear Amy, if you're going through double doors and someone holds the first door for you, of course, you say thank you as you go through the first door. But what about the second set of doors? Do you wait for the other person to open the second door and thank them again? Or should you reach for it yourself? Politely Confused in Illinois. Dear Politely, If you are physically able, you should open the second set of doors as a courtesy toward the person who did this for you. This pays the gesture forward. It also permits the person who got to the outer doors first to proceed into the building first, which he or she would have done if the person hadn't held the outer door open for you. But what do you do when someone politely opens the door and beckons you through the door first at a busy restaurant with a waiting list? Do you then wave that person through to take the spot ahead of you? I think you should. Dear Amy, I read your column every day. I must say I was a bit confused by your response to Confused, the young woman asking about who should pay for birth control. Fortunately, President Obama made it so this question does not need to be answered anymore. All Affordable Care Act qualified plans provide for some form of free birth control. If your reader is uninsured, she can visit any Planned Parenthood facility to obtain free or very low-cost birth control. Signed, Informed Reader. Dear Informed, many readers contacted me with this correction. When answering the question, I assumed that Confused was either uninsured or was perhaps covered under insurance that did not cover the cost of birth control. Mainly, I believe this was a larger question about sharing the responsibility of being sexually active and in a stable relationship with one partner. The burden for being sexually active weighs more heavily on the woman, but in a loving partnership, the responsibility should be shared.
Hamilton is about to hit the road. And more than a year before it arrives in many cities, theaters around the country are trying to convert the hunger for tickets into subscriptions and memberships. In many cities, theaters are encouraging potential patrons to subscribe to their 2016-17 seasons, even though Hamilton won't arrive until the following season, with the promise that those who subscribe now and then renew will be guaranteed Hamilton tickets and can lock in their chosen subscription seats. The strategy is eyebrow-raising because the theaters acknowledge that some tickets will ultimately be available for sale to non-subscribers. Given the widespread publicity over the scarcity of tickets to the Broadway production of Hamilton, though, many theatergoers appear unwilling to risk facing a sold-out show in their hometowns. In my 38 years of being involved with selling tickets for various activities, I don't believe there has ever been this kind of, but how do I get my ticket conversation, said Deborah F. Rutter, the president of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington. Hamilton is scheduled to be at the Kennedy Center for 14 weeks in the summer of 2018. On Wednesday, the center started selling tickets for its 2016-17 season, with the promise that anyone who subscribes that season and renews next will be guaranteed tickets. The effort to goad people into subscribing for 2 years to get tickets to the show prompted criticism in the Washington Post from a blogger who called it a quite high entrance fee, and from a letter writer who criticized what she called the extortionist price. Ms. Rutter said there would be tickets available to purchase to non-subscribers, but that it only made sense to reach out to try to bolster subscriptions first. People have accused us of gouging, but it's not gouging. If you want to be first in line, the best way to do that is to be a subscriber, Mrs. Ritter said. The strategy is already proving a significant boom to theaters where Hamilton will be staged. Some are nonprofits and some are commercial enterprises, but all depend on subscriptions or memberships as important elements of their budgets. Many arts groups have hard time sustaining subscription bases as consumers gravitate toward more a la carte and last-minute planning for their cultural activities. We live and breathe by the subscription model, said Lauren Reed, chief executive of the theater unit at Key Brand Entertainment, which brings shows to 30 stages in North America through its Broadway Across America subsidiary. Ms. Reed said she had never seen as high a level of consumer awareness about a new show as for Hamilton. Consequently, she added, every theater expecting Hamilton is teasing it early to promote subscriptions. The bottom line is Hamilton is really good for our industry, she said. It's an event and it's a cultural moment. And it's unusual that we have the opportunity like this to highlight something special. The tactic is working. In Chicago, the first city outside New York where Hamilton will be seen, starting on September 27th, Broadway in Chicago has sold out its fall subscription package for the first time, according to Lou Rosman, the organization's president. The company has not yet started selling tickets to non-subscribers, and there will be many such tickets available because the show plans to stay in Chicago as long as sales are healthy. But Mr. Raisin said, "We believe there will be very strong demand. You'd have to be hiding under a rock not to have that opinion." In San Francisco, where Hamilton is expected to run at the SHN Orpheum Theater for 21 weeks starting next March, SHN, which operates 2 locations in the city, expects to have 40,000 members enroll for its 2016-17 season, up from the usual 20 to 23,000. Hamilton has been an incredible driver for membership sales, said Greg Holland, SHN's chief executive. Also noteworthy, Mr. Holland said, was that 80% of the new membership buyers were first-time visitors to the company's website. In Iowa, Des Moines Performing Arts has said that Hamilton will come for an unspecified length of time at unspecified dates during the 2017-18 season, but that has been enough to cause a spike in subscriptions to the coming season. We've more than doubled the number of season tickets purchased compared to a year ago, and our renewal rate is shooting up to the levels we always aspire to, said Jeff Chasebig, the center's president and chief executive. Our goal is 11,000 subscribers, and I have no doubt we'll plow through that. The lead producer of Hamilton, Jeffrey Seller, said he was aware that theaters were using the promise of a future production of the show to market shorter-term subscriptions. I'm okay with it. It's good for the theater in general, he said. The only thing I don't want anyone to say is that if you don't buy a subscription, you won't be able to get a ticket because there will be single tickets. They won't sell out through subscriptions. The Broadway production of Hamilton, which has been essentially sold out since it opened last August, is expected to continue to run for years. The show is planning to visit other cities through 2 additional production, the one that will be open in Chicago this fall and stay there indefinitely, and the one that will begin in San Francisco next March and then tour. Thus far, tour stops, often without specific dates or duration, have been announced for Atlanta, Boston, Costa Mesa, California, Des Moines, Houston, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Tempe, Arizona, and Washington. Hamilton is also planning a 4th production in London, but that has not yet been officially announced.
From Rome, stolen 1493 letter on Columbus' voyage is returned to Italy. The U.S. has returned to Italy a letter written by Christopher Columbus in 1493, announcing his discovery of the New World that was stolen from a Florence library and unwittingly acquired by the Library of Congress. The 8-page letter conveys Columbus's marvel at the fertile islands he found, full of the greatest variety of trees reaching to the stars, and the timid natives who Columbus believed were ripe for conquest by Spain and conversion to Christianity. The letter had been stolen from Florence's Ricardiana library and replaced with a forgery that no one noticed until Italian authorities in 2012 launched a broad investigation across Italy into plundered rare books following some high-profile thefts. The original, meanwhile, had been sold to a rare book collector in Switzerland in 1990, then purchased by another collector at a Christie's auction in 1992 in New York. It was finally bequeathed to the Library of Congress in 2004 by the estate of its final owner. Italian and U.S. officials said Wednesday. 500 years later, it did the same trip as Columbus, round trip, Italian Culture Minister Dario Franceschina told a press conference in Rome with the U.S. ambassador by his side to announce the letter's return. U.S. Ambassador John Phillips declined to identify the estate that gave the letter to the Library of Congress, saying the investigation was still ongoing. But U.S. officials said both the final owner and the library acquired the letter in good faith, assuming its provenness was legitimate. Italy's Carabinieri Art Squad estimates the letter's value at $1.13 million.
Year after year, we hear arguments for taking the stink out of our sulfurous political rhetoric. It would be better for congressional productivity. It would be better for our international dignity. It would be better for our national literacy, our local advocacy, our general civility, and future etiquette of our children. But the one argument I had not heard until reading Sebastian Junger's book titled Tribe, on Homecoming, on Belonging, is that we should clean up our act for the sake of our returning troops. Mr. Junger never makes this point explicitly. What he writes simply is this: after months of combat, during which soldiers all but ignored differences of race, religion, and politics within their platoon, they returned to the United States to find a society that is basically at war with itself. People speak with incredible contempt about, depending on their views, the rich, the poor, the educated, the foreign-born, the president, or the entire U.S. government. It is a formula for deep despair. Today's veterans often come home to find that although they're willing to die for their country, he writes, they're not sure how to live for it. With that, Mr. Junger has raised one of the most provocative ideas of the campaign season and accidentally written one of the most intriguing political books, all without mentioning a single candidate or even the president by name. Tribe is not a typical Junger book. He doesn't tell one knockout story as he did in The Perfect Storm, which made him rich and famous, or as he did in War, which, along with his documentaries, Restrepo and Corregel, established him as one of the country's most mesmerizing chroniclers of the Afghanistan War. Rather, he gives us an extended play version of an article he wrote last summer for Vanity Fair, one that's part ethnographic, part history, part social science primer, part cri de coeur. Mr. Junger's premise is simple. Modern civilization may be swell, giving us unimaginable autonomy and material bounty, but it has also deprived us of the psychologically invaluable sense of community and interdependence that we homeads enjoyed for millions of years. It is only during moments of great adversity that we come together and enjoy that kind of fellowship, which may explain why, paradoxically, we thrive during those moments. In the 6 months after September 11, Mr. Junger writes, the murder rate in New York dropped by 40% and the suicide rate by 20%. War, too, for all its brutality and ugliness, satisfies some of our deepest evolutionary yearnings for connectedness. Platoons are like tribes. They give soldiers a chance to demonstrate their valor and loyalty, to work cooperatively, to show utter selflessness. Is it any wonder that so many of them say they miss the action when they come home? As a former anthropology major, Mr. Junger takes a special interest in tribal life. He notes that a striking number of American colonists ran off to join the Native American societies, but the reverse was almost never true. He describes the structure and values of hunter-gatherer groups, including the ones that lasted well into the 20th century, like the Kung and the Kalahari. Unfortunately, these parts of the book are also the dullest and most problematic. There's a numbingly familiar quality to much of the social science research he cites. It's not exactly news that nations with large income disparities are less happy than those without them, or that group cooperation increases levels of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Though Mr. Younger cautions against romanticizing tribal cultures, he sometimes does exactly that in ways that can be annoying. He notes, for example, that American mothers in the 1970s had a level of skin-to-skin contact with their babies that traditional societies would consider criminally low. Fair enough. I wonder, though, if he realized that in saying this, he's crashing open the gate for every attachment parenting demagogue out there, and that parents who actually have to go to work for a living and therefore can't have their babies pinned to their chests all day for 3 years straight will read these words and start to smack their heads against the desk. But his arguments about how detribalized we've become are undeniably strong. It's not just that our personal loyalties have shrunk to the universe of the size of a teacup, our immediate families, maybe a few friends. It's that we have so little regard for what's collectively ours. We litter, we fudge on our taxes. Medicare providers defraud Medicare. Bankers perform sleights of hand with the markets and destroy the commonweal. But Mr. Younger's most powerful and surprising argument is the one he makes about the military's epidemic of post-traumatic stress disorder, which in many cases he suspects may not be PTSD at all. Why, if you think about it, would roughly 50% of our Iraqi and Afghanistan's veterans apply for permanent PTSD disability when only 10% of them saw combat? The problem doesn't seem to be trauma on the battlefield, he concludes, so much as re-entry into society. And he suggests this problem might deserve its own diagnostic term. If the United States were more hospitable to veterans' needs, its returning soldiers wouldn't be foundering. It's our failure to adapt to veterans that's the problem, not the other way around. According to the work of 3 anthropologists who have looked closely at this issue, Mr. Younger writes, there are 3 critical factors to soldiers' successful reintegration. First, they must be rejoining a society with reasonably equal and decent economic opportunities. Second, they must be rejoining a society that has an intuitive understanding of what soldiers have gone through rather than perceiving them as victims. And third, veterans need to feel that they're just as necessary and productive back in society as they were on the battlefield, which means that of all the countries on earth for a soldier to come home to, the United States is among the very worst. Our veterans re-enter an unstable working class. They are awkwardly thanked by strangers for their service, which, as Mr. Younger ruefully observed, only highlights the schism between the few who have served and the great many who have not. And instead of jobs, they are offered lifelong disability. Soldiers go from a world in which they are united, interconnected, and indispensable to one in which they're isolated without purpose and bombarded with images of politicians and civilians screaming at one another on TV. How, Mr. Younger asks, do you make veterans feel that they are returning to a cohesive society that was worth fighting for in the first place? It's an urgent question. Anyone want to weigh in on it? Hillary? Donald? Is this thing on?
From the Omaha World Herald. Marion grad helped girls soccer to where it is today. Susie Dugan felt a great deal of satisfaction as she watched Omaha Marion win its 13th soccer title this week. Once a volunteer coach at the school, she and many others spent years working to get soccer sanctioned as a high school sport. It's been so neat to watch it grow, she said. I know I speak for all the rest of the people who work so hard at it. Dugan and her late husband, Patrick, coached daughters Debbie, 49, and Jennifer, 51, at Marion. It wasn't under the NSEA umbrella, but the Nebraska High School Soccer Association League tried to be the next best thing. Competition was offered at the varsity, junior varsity, and freshman levels. Standings and statistics were kept. Those involved wanted the sport to be ready to jump into the high school ranks. That happened in 1988 when Miller North and Omaha Creighton Prep earned the first Class A titles. Omaha Duchesne and Columbus Scotus were the first Class B champions in 1997. It was knocking at the door for 14 years, Dugan said. The high school athletic directors were hesitant to embrace a new sport that we told them was going to catch on. We tried to pay our dues. Dugan, Marion's representative for the league, said she and others traveled to small towns trying to enlist the support of parents who had children playing at the club level. She held several offices in the group. We talked to parent groups, coaches, and administrators in our attempts to convince the NSAA that soccer would be a positive addition to the high school athletic picture and that it was not a communist plot to destroy football, as one Omaha athletic director once claimed, Dugan said. She said the Crusaders were lucky to have Jim Miller as athletic director. He bought the team's uniforms and said he'd do what he could. We had 1 foot in the real high school world, Dugan said, and 1 foot in the organizational club sport. While she was coaching, Marion won several Hoover Cups, which was what the state title was then called. Dugan went on to help form the Toro Soccer Club, and last year was inducted into the Marion Athletic Hall of Fame for her contributions. She said it's wonderful to see the skilled players who take it for granted that they get to play soccer for their high school. That many will go on to play in college is the icing on the cake. Her granddaughter, Shayla Taut, is a manager for the Crusaders. A grandson, Tommy Poladna, is on Omaha Scuts squad. She has several other younger grandkids playing lots of sports, including soccer. Her daughters started playing soccer at St. Robert's Grade School, and there was no one to coach the team, so Dugan volunteered. I bought a book and said I'd try, she said. I was always 1 chapter ahead of what the kids were doing. Once they reached high school age, there was no place for them to play soccer. Thus, a battle was born. Dugan wanted to stress there were many involved in the fight. Those efforts came to mind as she watched the girls' title matches. It was so neat to see the crowd, the support, to see kids playing a game they loved, and it meaning something, she said. Anytime I go to a high school game, I think the same thing, how far they've come.
The following article is by Stephen M. Sipple of the Lincoln Journal-Star. Maurice Purify knows what can always make him smile. He forever understands there is a place where he can express himself. He said he notices it every time he comes across a photo of him on a football field or in an arena. He's typically smiling. He notices it nowadays as veteran receiver for the Arizona Rattlers of the Arena Football League. He's regarded as perhaps the best receiver in the 29-year history of the league. He notices those smiles when he sees photos of himself as a standout at Nebraska in 2006 and 2007. Back then, however, he smiled through pain so debilitating that he spiraled into a depression, although he could usually function well on the field. He said he learned from those dark days, learned the importance of friendship, of perseverance. He kept working, kept catching passes by the bushel and eventually accumulating AFL championship rings, 4 of them so far. When I think of the greatest receivers in the history of Nebraska football, the best pure wide receivers, Purify always comes to mind. He's 6'4", 225 pounds with big hands. He always runs well after the catch and still does. His size and athleticism make him particularly valuable in the red zone. Still does. He always had an enduring humility, always stressed the importance of wins rather than personal statistics. Still does. I don't play for stats, I play for rings, Purify said Wednesday from Maricopa, Arizona, near Phoenix. He still follows Nebraska football, still attends Husker watch parties in the Phoenix area. He sees photos of current NU receivers on social media, notices their smiles, and surmises that they're a close-knit bunch. He strongly believes in the importance of team unity. He would know his former Nebraska teammates helped him through the toughest time of his life back in 2006-07. In a span of about 6 months, he endured the deaths of 4 loved ones, including a grandmother. Being a young guy away from home, I really wasn't emotionally stable, said the native of Eureka, California, located 100 miles south of the Oregon border. The friends I had on the team kept me as stable as they could. They kept me sane. He mentioned Melanick Holt, Chris Brooks, Keith Williams, Carl Nix, Philip Dillard, Jordan Baku, and Marlon Lucky, but there were others. There were times I wanted to say, screw football, I don't want to do it anymore. I had all this stuff going on, Purify said. I didn't even feel like talking, really. I was really quiet in public. I had a hard time focusing in school, but my teammates kept me focused on the goals I wanted since I was a kid. The friends I had were really the key to my success at Nebraska. He found refuge on the playing field. The clutter in his mind dissipated. He could express himself. Well, my smile would come back, he says. That's the place I'm most happy, out on the field. It's no wonder in 5+ seasons in the AFL, he has 439 receptions for 6,192 yards. That's 14.1 yard per catch, and 152 touchdowns. He helped lead the Rattlers to 3 AFL titles before earning a 4th ring last season in a short stint with the San Jose SaberCats. He set out the season's first 7 weeks while recovering from a knee injury suffered late in the 2014. This year, he has 34 catches for 437 yards and 15 touchdowns for the Rattlers, 5-2, who will play the Los Angeles Kiss, 3-3, on Saturday in Phoenix. Purify's status for the game is uncertain because of an undisclosed injury. He said the Rattlers treat injury information in the secretive manner of the New England Patriots, but he is certain he'll return at some point this year and perhaps play in 2017 as well. I'm still having fun, he said. I believe my body has at least one more season in it. I'm going to go for it. In 2 seasons at Nebraska, after arriving from San Francisco City College, he had 91 receptions for 1,444 yards, 15.9 per catch, and 16 touchdowns. Remember a 63-yard catch and run touchdown against Texas in 2006? It was vintage Purify. He often made powerful runs after his catches, still does. He has a powerful stiff arm, still does. In recent years, he's managed to stiff-arm the demons that in 2010 essentially ended his brief NFL career with the Cincinnati Bengals, a period that included an arrest following a scuffle at a Northern Kentucky night spot. My only regret is at that time I was unable to overcome those demons, he said. I was still going through a little bit of depression. When you're at that age and you have people die, sometimes you don't know how to handle it, and then you end up handling it in the wrong way by drinking and all that stuff. He learned from his mistakes. He seems to be in a better place, at peace, and the smile remains.
From Council Bluffs. 1 year later, the memory still stings, with hopes of reaching the finals of perhaps track and field's marquee event. Council Bluffs St. Albert anchor Glenn Bertelson was inadvertently clipped by another runner during the preliminaries of the 1,600-meter relay, causing him to break stride and lose precious time. That mishap was magnified when the Falcons learned they had missed the finals by 1/100th of a second. It was heartbreaking, Bertelson said. It's been a thought in the back of my head the whole season. Now a senior, Bertelson will lead St. Albert into the 1A portion of the boys' state meet. The Falcons, who don't have a track to practice on, have qualified in 8 events, including 5 of the 6 relays. St. Albert's competes against much larger schools most of the season. It's often the lone 1A program in the field, like its basketball team, which benefited from a rugged schedule in reaching the 1A championship game. Coach James Kearney hopes the same rings true in track. The program is coming off its 7th straight state qualifying meet title. We like the fact that we go to those meets with that kind of competition, he said. It makes us even better for when we come to meets with the same size school. The the St. Albert coach has high hopes for his squad this weekend. I really think we can get in the top 10 and maybe push around that top 5, he said. We're going to have to run like we can. Bertelsen will be at the heart of St. Albert's efforts. His time in the 400 of 50.05 at the state qualifying meet is the best in 1A this season. He also anchors a 1600 relay of Leek Gronstal, Elijah Finn, and Andrew Hannafin that has run the second fastest time this season, 3:28.77, to Mount Ayers, 3:28.32. Only 3 1A runners this season have run faster than the 50.74 Bertelsen posted in the Hawkeye 10 conference meet, which placed him 6th before he improved on that time last week. Bertelsen, who as a sophomore was a part of a school record and 4th place state efforts in the 1600 relay and 1600 medley relay, said the Falcons have kept the big picture in mind throughout the year. At the end of the day, going to state is going to help a lot with those guys pushing me all year, said Bertelsen, who was 6th at state in the 400 last year. They've definitely pushed me and the whole team.
Stephen Curry scored 15 straight points in less than 2 minutes during one dazzling third quarter stretch, and the Golden State Warriors beat the Oklahoma City Thunder 118-91 on Wednesday to even the Western Conference Final at 1 game apiece. The league MVP scored 28 points, making 5 of 8 3-pointers and shooting 9 for 15 overall, while Klay Thompson added 15 points in a balanced performance by the defending champions to bounce back from just their 3rd defeat all season at Oracle Arena in the series opener 2 nights early. Kevin Durant finished with 29 points, but just 6 after halftime. Russell Westbrook had 16 points and 12 assists for the Thunder, who were out-rebounded for the first time in 5 meetings with the Warriors this season. Durant provided a big assist during Curry's flurry. He fouled the superstar point guard on a 3-point attempt with 6:33 to go in the third, then swatted his hand in disgust at the call and received a technical. While Durant hit a fadeaway jumper moments later, Curry answered by hitting consecutive long shots, 1 of 3, to make it 76-59 with 5:47 to go in the third. And I see that our time has now expired, and so now I'll go back to our central headquarters.
Thank you, sir. Another good evening.
Phil, it was a good evening, yes. And thank you again for getting that article.
Oh, you're welcome. And have a good week from tonight in Kansas City. Congratulations.
Well, actually, Monday I was in Kansas City for the graduation party. The graduation was actually on Saturday when I was still in Boise for my Kansas City grandchild. But next Thursday is Duchenne's graduation.
Oh, okay.
It's my daughter here at Omaha.
Okay.
That I'm going. I just can't miss her graduation.
Okay. So that's Molly.
That's Molly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All
Yes.
right. Very good. Yeah, we have our oldest 2 are about 1.5 years apart, and Dave, our oldest, lost a semester in there someplace, so they ended up